harassment, sexual harassment, pretty much harassment of all kinds. To some extent, there'll always be work in human resources when it comes down to harassment because of the fact that you have multiple people working in an environment. Sometimes they're in close proximity with each other, sometimes they're in close proximity for hours and hours and hours. And a lot of people spend more time in the workplace, literally, than they do at home, except for the time that's actually true sleeping. So you have this whole aspect of interrelationship of people, which is really a healthy thing, but at times it can go awry. And when it goes awry, a lot of it really comes down to this aspect of sexual harassment. Here's what the law says: it shall be unlawful employment practice for employer to fail, refuse to hire, discharge, otherwise discriminate against any individual with respect to compensation, terms, conditions, privileges, employment because of such individuals' sex. So you have that is a major part of Title VII, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is a big deal, and it's part of the area of leadership and management to ensure that you have a healthy workplace. Everybody should be able to come into work and not be fearful, frightened, or dread the aspect because of somebody coming onto them with unwelcome sexual advances, sexual favor, verbal or physical contact of a sexual nature. It shouldn't happen. It does, though. So with that, how do you go about dealing with it? Well, you have to deal with it. So we'll talk about that process, but make certain that the conduct, if it's explicit or implicit, make certain that it's not tied to employment. Make certain those comments have no place in the workplace. There's several different tools to use for this, but let's dive into the aspect. If you don't pay attention to it, some of the things that you're going to have is loss of opportunity victims. It's going to damage your productivity in the organization. You'll have expenses for defense, maybe even damages if you end up in court. It's a distraction, and everybody knows it's going on. You'll have morale issues. People will do this. They whisper behind everybody's back. Psst, did you see that? Oh, and a lot of times people simply don't want to get involved. It's not a lot of times. It's the vast majority of times. Things like this, inappropriate behavior in the workplace, go on a regular basis, and people are afraid to come forward because they don't want to get caught in the middle of whatever. And that is the nature of it, except leadership is leadership. That means you do get in the middle of it. You are supposed to sit down and deal with it. And here is a class that we have called employment law. We're going to talk about some of the different aspects to remove that negative aspect of the workplace. Maltreatment of women in the workplace goes back centuries. You really have Title VII. It really defines a lot of aspects of what discriminatory behavior did. Amazingly, our country's been around for a little bit, and the first time Supreme Court heard a case of it was in 1986. So the very first case was Meritorious Savings Bank versus Vinson. It was a landmark case, and it really establishes really the aspect of sex as listed in the Constitution to tie it into Title VII, that sexual discrimination is inappropriate and violates federal law. So let's look at some of the cases that we have historically. Here you have one over here, a sexual predator with a law firm in 1996. You have Supreme Court rules in the aspect of trying to nip harassment in the bud by policies and reporting. You even had McDonald's, of all places, in 2021. They fired a CEO and required him to return $105 million after sexual misconduct. It wasn't just one case, it was multiple cases where it was a quid pro quo situation, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But if you had sex with them, miraculously a promotion came. So it was one of those areas of true, probably disgust. But you know what? That is not the only one. 2025, there's a lawsuit against Meta alleging that toxic pattern signs in women. Now, by the way, just because a case is filed doesn't mean it's a decision. I'm just pointing out high-profile cases that have hit the court docket. Google, they actually had a guy who was blatantly guilty of multiple cases of sexual harassment, pretty vulgar stuff. And for what they did, because of the fact that person had access to massive amounts of information and was a genius on computer programming, they decided to just allow him to resign with a $90 million termination package. That's an awful lot of money for somebody who clearly was in violation of every corporate standard they had pertaining to this area and the law and pretty much human nature and condition in the aspect of really what's appropriate and inappropriate. He went past everything that we would consider a normal standard for a regular everyday person. We'll talk about that aspect as well. McDonald's, multiple sexual complaints. Uber, November 2024, they had 1,400 complaints gathered together in a class action. Kroger, Ralph's Grocery, they had a series of harassment complaints over the past 2 decades. They had Top Dog Entertainment, 2 women filed December 2024. These are all allegations. We don't know what all the facts are. These trials, a lot of them, are still coming to fruition. Historically, sexual harassment, it's been with us for years. Sometimes it's about sex. Sometimes it's about power. Sometimes it's consensual until things go sideways. By the way, those are some of the ugliest cases out there. Sometimes it begins with a good intention and begins or with just evil. It all depends. Historic harassment, it's been around for centuries. It will probably be continued to be around. It really comes down to how we deal with it in the workplace as to how you're going to accept it or reject it. Hopefully reject it. We're going to cover several topics in here. We're going to talk about how to sit down and avoid it. But in the meantime, be aware it happens. Be aware that if you are dealing with the aspect of employment law in the course of your employment, you need to pay attention to what's going on. And to deal with this, it takes actual leadership. And you can't turn a blind eye to it, or it'll damage the entire organization. And you too may be sitting in a chair in front of a jury trying to explain what happened. Historic harassment, it'll be with us. It's been with us. And I project that it'll probably continue in years to come. But in the workplace, hopefully your workplace, you'll take steps to make certain it doesn't happen on your watch. Take care.